So over recent years, most city commentators have been very focused on what central bankers have been doing and much less focused on what the fiscal authorities are doing, what governments are doing in terms of their tax and spending plans. And in the US, a lot of that commentary has largely been confined to whether or not it's prompted a government shutdown. And of course, we recently saw in the US the longest government shutdown in history of 35 days duration. But it looks as though we're shaping up for a massive fight over the US budget this year. One of the reasons actually goes back to the last time there was a significant government close down, which was 2011, and at that time legislation was passed to introduce government spending caps, and those kick in actually the next fiscal year in the US, which starts in October. So what does that mean in practice? Well, what it means in practice is that defense spending in principle should be coming down $71 billion, and non-defense discretionary expenditure will be coming down something like $45 billion. Now, what does President Trump seem to be planning at this point in time? Well, what he seems to be planning is, to some extent, perhaps no surprises here, get around the defense spending problem by basically accessing Congress's war budget, the so-called Overseas Contingencies Operations budget. And there's an idea, in fact, rather than defense spending coming down in the next fiscal year, it's actually going to be boosted even further to $750 billion, $750 billion. Although I understand there's likely to be significant pushback in raiding the cookie jar to this level. But the real fight, particularly in what is now a democratically controlled House, is the $55 billion reduction in the non-defense discretionary budget, because that's a reduction of about 9%. That's a very, very tight squeeze, and I think at the moment, particularly if we are looking at a slowing US economy, and there are certainly signs out there that is actually happening, that's going to be an enormous fight. And of course, all of that will come against a backdrop of presumably a heightening ramp up to a US presidential election in 2020. So all in all, things really hotting up in a big way. I think we've been very, very used, as I said, to central banks getting a lot of their headlines. But I think that once again, we're going to see Congress and the fights over the US budget in Congress take center stage in the months ahead. This legislation is being put together at the moment, so we should be starting to get more tangible news flow on this quite shortly. But again, it would be no surprise to me whatsoever that we end up in a deadlock and we end up in yet another standoff, and probably, I think, another shutdown in the fourth quarter of 2019. So won't that be something to look forward to? Yet more market volatility could be good for traders, not necessarily so good for investors.